Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please call the roll.
Alderman Strelchak.
Here.
Alderwoman Talaco. Here. Alderman Meyer.
Here.
Alderman Hancher.
Here.
Alderman Bach.
Here.
Alderman Parrish.
Here.
Alderman Bratt. Alderman Gebhardt.
Here.
Mayor Nervin.
Here. We're all here. That's good. I think City Administrator Jones is going to kick this off with an overview, and then we'll just see where the evening takes us.
Okay.
If there's any questions, you want them to just keep them as they go and not wait?
Sure. I think this can be a very interactive type of meeting. It's a workshop meeting, so I would appreciate and encourage interruption as we go.
Perfect. All right. The floor is yours.
I know we've got a couple of meetings scheduled here tonight, so I'll be mindful of everyone's time. But as has been the case over the last number of years, staff typically requests members of the council, and in this particular instance, as they're in their role, or your role, as the Appropriations Committee, to gather here in late summer as we are kicking off our budget process, so as to give you a preview of some of the factors and considerations and challenges and maybe even opportunities that we're seeing as we begin the laborious task over the next 30 to 35 days of putting together our spending plan for 2025. And before you all meet to decide on the spending plan and what goes into that budget and what may not go into that budget, when you meet in early October, we want to give you the benefit of an early preview or a look-see at some of those numbers and some of that information that's certainly going to carry through the rest of this year and into 2025. But I have an admission to make. I'm not sure this is going to be the most exciting of budget years. I foresee this being very status quo, because if we rewind back to the strategic planning workshop we had in May over at the Ozaki Country Club, and we even rewind back to the strategic planning workshop that members of the council did or undertook a couple of years ago, we have got so many projects, and this is just a quick sampling. We've got so many projects underway that somewhat relate to the budget that we'll be talking about either here in 2024 or into 2025. But many of these are capital projects. Many of these are ARPA funded projects. And the staff members here and all of the staff members that work behind our department heads are busily tasking away on what I would consider to be initiatives and efforts and enhancements to the organization and certainly the community that maybe aren't going to touch a lot of what we're going to cover here tonight and when we get together as the Appropriations Committee next in October. So this is just, again, a sampling of many of the projects that we have going on here this year. We were talking about some of them as recently as our August council meeting. You'll see some of this coming forward even at our meeting in a couple of weeks in September. So tonight's agenda, as laid out in the packet that went out to you, we'll do a quick run through on fiscal year 2024. We'll look forward to 2025, talk a little bit about revenue and expenditure considerations that were talked about in my memo to the council. We'll talk a little bit about capital and debt financing going into 2025, component unit funding, otherwise known as the Weinberg Library and the Southern Ozaki Fire and EMS Department, and then we'll give an update on ARPA as well. We have a deadline approaching of December 31st. And as was iterated with the committee last year, really the workshop purpose is to provide an overview of the budgetary landscape, and as we covered, for you to ask questions, provide input, and certainly we can determine if another meeting is necessary after tonight. So we'll jump right in. Fiscal year 2024. And here's a snapshot of the revenues across the major categories or line items that comprise our $18 million general fund budget. And as was noted in the memorandum in the packet for this meeting, several of our revenue sources are lagging. And some of that can be explained. Taxes and state shared revenue, internal service fees, those are all large revenue sources that typically accrue in the third and the fourth quarters of the fiscal year. So at this point, while they look low, we're not concerned. These are good budgetary targets that we should expect to hit right on the nose. Some of our other revenue sources, such as permits for building inspections, electrical permits, HVAC, plumbing, were a little behind trend where we should be at 7 months of the fiscal year, which is about 58%. This number is higher than what we recorded a year ago, so we're moving in the right direction. And as the council will recall, we made some adjustments to our fee schedule starting January 1st of this year. So we're seeing a little bit of uptick in terms of the revenue vis-a-vis 1 year ago. Many of the other revenue sources that you see here, public safety fees, very similar from a trend perspective to our permits and inspection fees. DPW fees are down, but there's a corresponding offset in the expenditure budget, and if we don't realize a lot of revenues in this line item, we also see a reduction in our expenditures as well. So not overly concerned with the lower number there because of that offset. Parks fees are cranking along, and we had a really good couple of days at the pool when the weather was 90 degrees on Sunday and Monday. I think we had about 1,800 people come through the gates over the course of those 3 days. So we're staying open later this season than we ever have in my time here, all the way up until Sunday of this week. And typically we've been closing around the August 20th to 22nd timeframe, and we're taking advantage of the warmer weather and the fact that most of the other municipal pools in the area are now closed. I expect this number to even go up and maybe exceed this by the end of the third quarter. In terms of development fees, we're at 44%, not a huge number within the overall revenue picture. And then, as I talked about, internal service fees, that'll account for at the end of the year, and we'll hit that number. Other revenue is just at about 50%. And good news, interest income continues to rise on a year-over-year basis. We've redeployed some of our money on a cash management basis to take advantage of higher interest rates through our banking relationship with Port Washington State Bank, as well as Dana Investment Advisors. And as of 7 months, we're well above what we budgeted for the entire fiscal year. So this number should probably get closer to $450,000 by the end of the year, which will help offset any reductions we see on the permit and inspection side. I'll stop here. Any questions on the revenue side so far this year? This is a 7-month snapshot through July 31st. Okay, over to expenses. Currently, we're sitting at 56%, and as I mentioned, 7/12 of the month is equivalent to 58% of the year. So we're doing well from an overall expenditure standpoint. Less red on this screen, as you can see, and as was explained in the memo, there are only a couple of line items that are over, 2 of which are component units, fire and EMS, and the library, each of which get quarterly payments from the city. So we've made 3 of the 4 quarterly payments, which equates to about 75% of their total take of the revenue, and that's driving some of that 56% number that you see at the bottom of the screen. Information services also had a balloon payment made in July, and Common Council, within that budget is the festivals committee expenditures, and we've made some advances on those in anticipation of the Taste of Mequon, which is next week. So overall, we're doing well, and as you can see, it's mostly green, and the departments and staff here with the city do a great job of managing those expenses so that we can stay at or under budget
throughout the remainder of the fiscal year. So, any questions here?
Nothing real concrete, but the common council budget, including festivals, should we divide that out and just have that as a separate line item? Like a festivals budget, or is it just easiest to assess through the common council and that's why it continues to be that way?
Typically, we've accounted for any special event expenditures like the the fund before the 4th parade, the tree lighting ceremony, through the common council budget. But given where we've gone over time and now that we have history with the festivals committee in particular and taste, we could certainly look at a separate budget for event style expenses that would separate out directly from the mayor and council budget. As the council will recall, we used to have a separate budget for the mayor and the mayor's expenses and the council's stipend and other expenses. A couple of years back, we combined those two budgets because the dollar amount, frankly, is not very high.
Right. My goal is to keep it as easy as possible for the festivals committee to do the great things that they're doing with the least amount of headache to get it done. But just coming into budget and knowing that this is televised and, we're at 70% of budget with a call out to something else. Well, for semantics sake, it just might look better just as a separate line item is the only reason I'm asking,
That's also the league payment we pay in the beginning of the year.
Marie just mentioned, part of that overage is also the League of Wisconsin Municipalities membership.
Sure.
We pay at the very beginning of the year. That's about a $11,000, almost $12,000 expense.
Okay.
So, happy to look at it.
Thank you. First of all, is there special sound instructions with the microphones, or can I just talk? Because there's nothing near me, so I just want
Yep,
to make
you
sure.
can just talk. There's an area mic. There's
All right, so everyone needs to
can share
pass
that
these
one.
around all night, or no?
Encourage everyone to speak up, and
Okay.
I think the mics should pick up.
Right
I
here,
think-
buddy.
I think we've got
All right,
six microphones.
all right, thank you. Anyways, thank you. First of all, good evening to my colleagues, and thank you to staff for all the preparation that goes into this evening. A couple of quick questions for you. Is the assessor, just because of where we're at this point in the year for the contract, or are we experiencing real savings there? Mostly because I'm thinking ahead to the new contract, so.
Most of the expenses within this budget relate to the contract that we have
Okay.
with Catalyst, who serves as our city assessor, as well as the assessment technician,
Okay.
Carolyn Vogel, who works here out of
Great.
City Hall.
So I think where I again, great job preparing this. It might be more useful to see in the future, like where we were at this time last year, because is it in another place? Okay, so just not in this particular. Thank you.
It's in the packet.
Okay. Yeah, because I just struggled because the red and the green and because it just all depends on where things time out. So it's hard to judge it on that.
Sure.
But thanks again.
We try to provide that level of detail in the packet.
Got it.
However, there is a limit to how much we can put on a screen before you can't see it.
Understood. Thank you.
Alderman Bach.
May I just ask a general overarching budget question?
Sure.
Just for since still relatively new to this whole budget process. So we have sounds like a great new CFO. But it's just, we hear it in the news. So I'm just going to use these school boards, for example, with the budget process. You've got school boards at MPS, Mapledale, Indian Hill, now Wauwatosa, where, all of a sudden these school boards seem to be sitting at a meeting and somebody says there's a new CFO that comes in and they say, oh, we're $8 million short. This was just discovered, and it becomes a kind of crisis. And the school board members sit there like deers in the headlight, what's going on. So my just general question is, what are like the checks and balances from the city's standpoint? So, when the budget is created, when you look at the budget, I'm assuming that goes through the city administrator. We're all learning about it, but that sounds like there are checks and balances in place so that alders are not caught off guard if something happens? Just a general question. It's just, we got a new person and,
It's a good question, and there have been lots of stories in the news of late regarding some of those nightmare scenarios that some area school districts are facing. I will tell you, and this is being frank, we follow a very, shall we say, incremental approach to budgeting here in Mequon. We don't employ a zero-based approach where we start from scratch every year building a budget. We use the preceding year's budget as a base and as a reference point for building the next year's budget. So right there, I think we have a check in place such that we're comparing to what's been in place in previous years. When you combine that with the fact that we are required to have an audit every year through an independent third party, in this case Baker Tilly, they are coming in as CPAs and doing a deep dive on our budget and our spend and how we're accounting for all of our expenses throughout the course of the fiscal year that they're otherwise examining. That financial report in the form of the audit comes to the council, is reviewed by the Finance and Personnel Committee, and is ultimately accepted by the Common Council each year in the June-July timeframe. Operationally and more mechanically, each year we rely upon each of the areas here that you see, departments and divisions, to put together their budgets, which eventually stack on top of each other and comprise the overall general fund budget that goes to you as the Appropriations Committee. So there's a level of detail which we use to build the overall budget that starts at the department and the division level and then works through the budget team. We are in the midst this week of having individual meetings with all of the various departments to review all of the budgets and more that you see on this screen. So tomorrow morning, for instance, we have 4 hours blocked out with Director Lundeen and her staff to go through all of the division budgets within Public Works and Parks. And that's about a half-day exercise. We'll be going through all the city administrator budgets from noon until 2, and then we're meeting with Chief Pryor to go through the police department budgets from 2 to 4. So we spend a lot of time as a budget team. There are a lot of people in the room, a lot of eyeballs on the numbers, making sure that all of the information is accurate in terms of health insurance, employee counts, all of the monies that are allocated in the previous year versus the current or the proposed fiscal year. And all of that information sews up to the proposed budget, which comes to you. And frankly speaking, I think that's about a 150-page document with detail regarding every employee in this organization. And as we all know, employees are about 70% of our spend.
excellent. That's super helpful. Thank you.
Well, you know, I called him yesterday, the exact same question.
Yeah.
And I taught him all TOSA. And to have $4 million for
Yeah.
it's
Mind-boggling? Is that the term? Mind-boggling?
yeah. How could you misplace how could you overspend $4 million if you have a budget?
Yeah.
And so I called him up yesterday, the exact same question.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
and
good.
furthermore to what Will just said, Finance and Personnel, we review information at this level of detail quarterly. So we're seeing third quarter numbers, but we've seen, if you're on F&P, you've seen quarters 1 and 2 already. So we're probably a little bit different than school boards like that, where we've got a dedicated committee that's looking at things on a regular basis. So we may have a few more checks and balances.
But to just sort of wrap up the thought, Alderman Bach, I was telling Alderman Hancher yesterday, you all have a role too to play as members of the council, members of the Appropriations Committee. We have turnover on the staff level. We have turnover amongst our elected officials. We need that fresh set of eyes. We need that diligence. We need that discipline every year as we go through this process to make sure our spending plan is tight. And if there's something that looks awry or that's amiss, we need somebody in this room or somebody within the organization to call that out and say, hey, that looks like that wasn't accounted for.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move right along and get into fund balance update. I won't spend too much time on this slide, but year end in 2024, we are projecting a surplus in all of our major funds. That includes the general fund, which we just talked about, our parks impact fees, although we're making a draw there for the Lenton Park Pavilion project, which is underway. Our revolving loan fund continues to accrue principal as loans from the COVID-19 pandemic are paid back. Our debt service fund is now no longer negative and has a positive balance. And TID 2 has emerged from a deficit position and will finish in the black as we close that out through an audit late this year. And TID 3 continues to crank. And look at the progression on those numbers from 2021 to what we expect in 2024. That should continue over the next couple of years as we move towards closing that tax increment district in the 2028 timeframe. So that money will be used to repay the debt we issued for the public improvements, as well as a capital projects loan that was forwarded to the TID earlier when it was in its formative stages and it wasn't accruing the revenue that we're seeing now. So, good story on the fund balance side. But we also want to talk a little bit about fund balance and the financial policies that we approved earlier this month. And what I have Director Arnett passing around is a document that was forwarded to me after the packet went out from Ellers, which talks about some of the criteria that the rating agencies use relative to fund balance. And currently, our range is 10 to 12%. As we were going through the financial policies, the review with the Finance and Personnel Committee earlier this year, staff was recommending an expansion of that range to be between 10 and 15%. That was to more closely align with industry best practice issued by GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, which, as noted in the best practice within your packet, suggests that all governments, regardless of size, maintain a minimum fund balance equivalent to 2 months of expenditures or revenues. Currently, the city's bond ratings are AA through Standard & Poor's and AA2 through Moody's. Those are both 2 notches below AAA. So we're high grade from an investment perspective, but we're not AAA, and we're not gaining the lowest, the very, very lowest interest rates possible when we go out to market and issue debt like we will early next year. In speaking with Ellers last week, we had them in to talk a little bit about this matter in particular before tonight's meeting. Brian Raymer, who presented to the council at the strategic planning workshop on utility funding, indicated that AAA rating criteria nowadays is in the 35% range. And you would have to have a fund balance somewhere in that 35% range to get AAA. And over a 20-year issue at about $10 million, which is similar to what we issued back in 2022, we would see an interest cost savings of about $200,000. So that's a lot of money to squirrel away to save $200,000 over 20 years, which is about, if my math is correct, $10,000 a year. So maybe not the best use of taxpayer money in order to achieve a AAA bond rating. Some of the things that we've done over the years to keep our interest costs low include issuing debt at the beginning of the year when typically the municipal bond volume is lower because most governments don't have their act together coming out of the new year, and the supply of municipal bonds is low. And so the demand is typically pretty steady throughout the year, and if you can get out to market early in the year, you're gonna probably drive a lower interest rate. We've seen that on our last 2 issues. rates are starting to come down, and if, you know, the Fed begins to lower next month, we should see reduced borrowing costs going into next year and then beyond if we're looking further at facility improvements or replacement. And then my suggestion would be that the finance and personnel maybe schedule a meeting with Ellers in October, at the October meeting, to begin the 2025 debt planning process. And we can talk more in depth about fund balance and the effect that it may or may not have relative to where we are now and what we foresee for 2025. So, I know the council, members of the F&P wanted to have this on the agenda tonight. I'm certainly happy to open it up for questions. The sheet that you have before you, again, rating factors of comparable communities. And I'll just point out one item on the chart. My pointer's running out of juice here. This is our fund balance as of 8/21. We're at 11.7%. If you look at some of these other comparable communities, they have a much higher fund balance than we do. Interestingly, they mostly have the same rating that we have, because AA, that's Standard & Poor, is equivalent to AA2, which is Moody's. So AA is the same as AA2. It's 2 notches below AAA. We're helped out by the fact that we have a very, very large tax base relative to all these other communities. If we were to bring our fund balance up, as I mentioned earlier, to a higher range, we would likely have a higher rating than many of these comparable communities. So I just wanted to show this to you to indicate and illustrate the fact that many other communities are peer communities to some respect here in southeast and south central Wisconsin have fund balances that are frankly higher and a little more robust than what we have here in Mequon. So, yes, sir.
We've been talking about this at F&P for years, and this is the most concrete data I think we've ever seen to show like what is the advantage of increasing our reserves for the bond ratings relative to increase savings over time. So great job to the finance team to show us in real numbers that, in my mind, I think the status quo is pretty good, and I don't see an advantage in going. You would have to accumulate so many reserves to even get any benefit out of it. So I feel like the status quo is pretty good, and we're on the right path, and thank you again.
And to that point, Alderman Parrish, and I've stated this many, many times, we can amend our financial policies at any time. So if the whim strikes or the council has a fancy to take a look at it again, whether that's next year or beyond, they can be amended within a meeting's time. Thank you. All right, moving right along to revenue and expense considerations for next year. Currently, we have a tax rate, as was mentioned in the memo, of $3.12 per assessed value. Our net new construction, and I'll get into this in a minute, for next year is just under 1%, which gives us about $200,000 of available revenue without having to adjust the tax rate and increase taxes. Building permit fees, as I mentioned, are lagging a little behind budget, but a lot of that's being offset by the higher interest rates that we're accruing through some of our investments. We had a decrease in the amount of ARPA funding that we applied to the budget here in 2024. That number was about $65,000, $67,000. And for 2025, we're not planning to use any ARPA proceeds as those funds begin to wind down. The Joint Fire Department with the Village of Thiensville gives us an opportunity to make a levy adjustment equivalent to CPI plus 2%. In speaking with the Thiensville Village Administrator, the rolling CPI number that would be applicable to that formula right now is sitting at about 3.1% for the last 12 months. And then, as was mentioned in the memo, the city and any other municipality throughout Wisconsin may exceed the levy limits which are in place, either through debt, issuing additional debt for projects, or via referendum, which we've seen throughout Ozaukee County here this year in 2024 and beyond. Net new construction, here's the recent history going back just before the pandemic. And as you can see, we have been in the 1 to 2% range over the last 6 fiscal years. And this provides money available to the budget anywhere between 360 down to 200,000, which is probably the lowest amount that we have to work with over the last number of years. Comparatively speaking, Ozaukee County is doing probably a little better over the last couple of years, at least this year and into next year. But there are a lot of building projects going on in the Cedarburgs and the Graftons and beyond, which is probably not commensurate with the approach that we've taken historically here in Mequon, not chasing development in order to generate additional revenue. I will point out, interestingly, the net new construction number for 2023 was almost $71 million, which is close or a little below the amount of net new construction that we generated in 2020, which was the pandemic year. But you can see, as you continue to grow your tax base, the percentage increase actually becomes less. And when the percentage increase becomes less, the money that's available to the budget isn't getting bigger. And so while our tax base is growing, the money that we have available to assume expenses that are related to inflation or that we have to otherwise account for, i.e. health insurance, wages, fuel, other commodities that we utilize to provide services to the community, it gets harder and harder as our tax base continues to grow.
The numerator stays about the same and the denominator keeps
Yeah.
getting bigger.
Yeah, and you can see that here with the 70 and the 70, we were at 1.4 and that gave us 250,000. Now we're at 0.9 and we're just generating 200,000. So the money's not going as far in terms of how it did a couple years back. Here's another chart that was in the packet which compares the last 10 years of net new construction versus the consumer price index. And you can see the amount of net new construction that we've accumulated over the last 10 years, almost $750 million, just shy of $1 billion. And that's generated about 1.5% a year, or the aggregate of just under 15%. When you juxtapose that with CPI, the aggregate increase over the last 10 years has been 30%. So it's almost a 2-to-1 ratio between the normal inflationary factors that we're facing from a cost perspective versus what we're able to generate in terms of new revenue without having to raise taxes. This is the money that we naturally accrue off the tax base that's allowed for us to spend without raising taxes. So, just wanted to point that out for the council to understand in terms of some of the challenges and the headwinds that we're facing from a revenue perspective. Any questions at this point?
So is that 2024 number, is that the final number, or is there still some more possible?
I've asterisked the year 2024. That is the CPI as of July. So that's the July number. Right now it's 2.9. You know, if trend continues, that may be just a little lower at the end of the year, maybe 2.7.
I was actually talking about the amounts, the 64 million. On the last slide.
The 64 million, that is the amount of net new construction, yeah.
So that's the final number for the year?
Yep.
Okay.
Just wanted to clarify, is the total line, is that additive of all those, or is that calculated on a compound basis?
It's just the total.
Okay, if you compounded it, it would actually be worse.
Yeah, I didn't get that fancy.
Yeah. The story's worse than this.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's probably closer to 2.5 to 1.
And then I mentioned, and it was referenced in the memo for the packet, many communities are now going to referenda. Cedarburg, both the city and the town, Grafton, both the village and the town, Port Washington, Saukville, and our neighbors to the west, the village of Germantown, all have gone to referenda this year, and on a combined basis raised just under $7 million to support operational spending. Now, I will add the caveat that most all of this is related to public safety spending, in particular fire. Germantown had a combined referenda for both adding police and fire staffing, but the top 6 communities that you see listed there all went because they're looking to add full-time fire and EMS personnel to fill out their paid-on-call ranks. We've been able to do that, and we have 12 full-time positions. We haven't had to go to referendum. So we've been doing it organically and managing our costs up to this point.
And those referendums don't include any of the buildings, like the public safety buildings that Port Washington is building. That's not included in the referendum.
These
That's
are
separate.
all operating
Just for
referendums.
operating.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a corollary, some of the more recent efforts that staff has undertaken and the organization has undertaken relative to managing our costs go back all the way to the year 2017 or so, when we consolidated 3 of our public works facilities into the larger renovated facility over on Weston Drive. We issued $9 million of debt, and we didn't increase the city tax rate to pay for that project. We found savings within the existing budget to absorb that $600,000 worth of debt service that is actually scheduled to fall off, I think, in 2028 or 2029. That was a big lift organizationally and certainly for our departments. We've initiated a tri-party agreement with Thiensville and the school district to fund our school resource officer program. Previously, the city was footing that entire bill. We've consolidated dispatch, as we know, with Ozaukee County. We've merged with Thiensville on the fire side. And just 2 years ago, we joined the League Municipal Insurance Pool and saved well over 6 figures, making that move out of the private insurance market. So we're looking at our cost centers. We are doing our darndest to manage our expenses and be as efficient as we can, but the revenue is not keeping up with our costs otherwise. And it's proving to be a real challenge. So I'll stop there. That's the revenue outlook, and we're about to jump into it, the expense side of things. Any questions at this point? So, flipping the script, you can see some of the percentage increases that we're looking at. Retirement, on the general employee side, it's just under 1%. For police and fire, it's 4.5% over a year ago. Health insurance, last year, you'll recall, we absorbed about a 14% increase in premiums through the state plan. This year it's less, which is a good thing, but it's still clicking along at a way too high rate for our liking. And the average increase is about 8.8% across all of our employees, whether that's single or family coverage. The league has indicated that insurance rates will be adjusting anywhere from 2 to 4%. If we know anything about property insurance, either here locally or across the country, that's a pretty good deal. And I think we're seeing some of the benefits of pooling with 500 other municipalities across the state, in that we're not seeing double-digit increases for property insurance and some of those other lines that are higher. Auto insurance is another one where it could be a lot higher if we were out there alone. Police contract negotiations are going to be kicking off in a couple of weeks, so that's going to have an impact on the wage picture going into next year. We're we're looking to implement the Phase 3 recommendations from the compensation study completed in late 2021, which is to move employees through their ranges. Mr. Shinneman was before you during the, I think, April Committee of the Whole to lay out the framework for what we're looking to do there. And then you saw a list of compulsory increases that we're also looking at to the tune of just over $200,000. Some of the bigger ticket items on that chart include road salt, fuel, and software licensing for the organization. We've also got some emergent costs, and I don't want to lose sight of this because I think we've done a really good job from a strategic planning standpoint and a workshop monthly planning standpoint, at our committee of the whole meetings, where we're talking about issues such as the FEMA maps. We're talking about, in a couple of weeks, the community survey. We're talking about brush site improvements like we did a couple weeks ago. And we're talking about the council chamber heating and ventilation system. But these are costs that right now don't have a funding source. And we have to be mindful of the fact that if we choose to spend, we've got to be able to pay. And so I just want to keep this front and center for the council so that we don't get out over our skis and begin incurring costs where we struggle to pay the bills. In terms of FEMA mapping, I'm confident that we'll be able to find some money through our ARPA funds to satisfy that cost. The same thing with the community survey. The TASER squad and body camera summary that you saw from Chief Pryor in the packet has an annual cost of about $100,000. We've identified a funding source for that in 2025, so he will be bringing that contract to you later this year so that we can begin the upgrade of these systems so that they're working at maximum capacity. But that's going to be a cost that we're going to need to assume on an operating standpoint starting in 2026. Brush site improvements, that's going to be going out to bid here later this fall. That will likely impact not really the operating budget. We've got some ARPA money set aside, but with the paving and or the concrete work for the parking lot, that's likely going to be a component of our road borrowing in early 2025. And then the council chamber HVAC project, there are some other components to that, sound system, windows, the ceiling. I think that's currently out for bid. The numbers came back a little high, and that's another cost we're going to have to account for if we decide to move forward on those enhancements. So I just wanted to keep this in front of you. I haven't lost track of it. I don't want you to lose track of it. I know our staff hasn't lost track of it, but these things do add up, and I don't want us to get caught short. Okay, one other cost that I outlined in the packet was the need to do a revaluation. And we last did this just back in 2021, but the real estate market here locally and certainly in many sectors across the country is red hot. And the ratio between our assessed value and the market values has quickly fallen out of whack. 3 years ago when we did this, it cost us about $220,000 through Catalyst, our current assessor provider. We only had 3 hearings at Board of Review when we went through and adjusted the assessed values by over $600 million. The law indicates that we have to be within the 90 to 110% ratio or threshold where assessed value relates to market value. Right now we're at 79% and we have 4 years to comply. We're in the 3rd year where we're out of compliance. The Finance and Personnel Committee reviewed this in July with the city assessor and tacitly recommended that we do the same market update evaluation that we did 3 years ago at a cost of $225,000. That is the second cheapest option of the 4 that were outlined by the assessor and that were included in your packet. And given the interest money that we've been able to accrue on our ARPA funds, I think that's going to be a really good source of one-time revenue to pay for this expense so that we can become compliant after 2025. So, unless there are any objections here tonight, that is certainly my plan for the budget that we're gonna present to you a month from now. Happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Just clarification. The last evaluation was completed in 2021. Is there 4 years compliant, we're 3 years behind? How does that work out? Because in 2021, add on 3 years, so that'd be 2024. So we're out of compliance the minute our evaluation was done?
2022, we fell below 90%. And the ratio has continued to go down.
So within 1 year, we fell off 10%
Well,
of the evaluation?
I think Alderman Meyer's point is a little, it's valid. I mean, we were at 92% in that year. Very quickly, the next year will be this next year will be actually the second full year. I'm looking at packet page.
So we didn't
Nine.
fall below the 90% in 2022.
Technically speaking, we did not. We were at the 91% ratio.
So
So
we
you are,
actually got-
you're
We
correct.
got 2 years to comply with that remaining then?
Yes,
Okay, instead of the 1.
correct.
Okay.
Next year would be the third year we would be out of compliance. We would be going through the revaluation. So the revaluation would be occurring in the third year where we're out of compliance. I guess I probably didn't explain that as clearly as I just stated it now.
No problem.
Thank you for that. Yes?
I would just add on, we had a great conversation about this at Finance and Personnel. It doesn't seem like there's any way to delay or defer this expense. Certainly appreciated them sourcing funding for it. And then I just think it's important for the taxpayers to know, I mean, that doesn't mean, every time the assessment's going up, it doesn't mean the taxes are going up. That's not the objective here. It's to equalize sales and values. So I think that's people's knee-jerk reaction when they see us reassessing, and it's really just us complying with the law, and we're out of time. And the contract that was proposed seems really a good value, because it hasn't really gone up. The proposal for this upcoming year hasn't gone up at all in like 5 years, so it's hard to imagine if we were to wait another year, which we could do, that we'd get any better value for what will ultimately be required. So that's why we recommended approval, not that we enjoy doing so.
And the sooner we do it, the less impact or shock that our residents and our property owners will experience when we finalize the assessments. Because we're currently at 79%, and if we let it fall to 70 or 65%, the ground that we need to make up to get back to 100% is just that much greater and potentially impactful. Alderman Strelchak.
Just, anytime we go through this, can you just summarize, just for the public, in general, what, really what this means? So let's say your house is, assessed at $500,000, the assessment goes up, 10% across the board for the city, so you're at, 550,000, and then your house goes up the same, that 10%, that same amount. It's an equalized value across the city. Can you just describe financially, like how the taxes don't go up and how it's an equalized value?
I can explain it.
Do you want to jump in?
Yeah. If we don't spend a single more dollar, the taxes don't go up. Just everyone pays a lower mill rate. You'll pay the exact same dollar value if there's dollar for dollar static budget.
Right.
It is a very misunderstood thing in the public. You can see when Milwaukee did this recently, all the fury on social media, oh, they're raising our taxes. Like, no, they're just reassessing. Now, they may also try to raise your taxes at the same time, but that has nothing to do with the reval. So it's on our backs, yeah, when we pass the budget.
Our funding is completely and directly tied to the levy that the council sets as part of our budget. if I go back, our levy is set at $12.3 million. And to the extent that we're adjusting that for net new construction or any other costs that we need to absorb or the council approves, that's the amount of money we have to work with. And
Right.
it's redistributed via a lower tax rate.
I can't remember the exact numbers, but the last time we revaled, the mill rate went down substantially just to offset it. So we're working from a new baseline, but you can go back, calculate what all that means, but it just zeroed out.
Yeah, there've been people when I've been out in the public having conversations that, well, my tax rate went down, why would my tax rate go down? Why would my tax rate go up? So, thanks for the
We can
explanation on
certainly,
that.
if we move forward and the contract is approved and this gets into the budget, we can work on some messaging
Messaging would be very
Prospectively.
helpful, yeah, for sure.
with both the assessor's office and certainly our office, to get the word out via the bulletin and on the website, so that people understand and maybe even provide a couple of examples or illustrations.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Got a question. So
Alderman
just
Brett.
looking at 2023, when Newcastle sought the exemption under 7011, when our assessed value went down, do you expect any other of these facilities to be requesting those exemptions?
To the best of my recollection, that was a product of a sale and a new owner coming in and requesting tax exempt status. And some of that revenue was made up through a payment in lieu of taxes
So like
agreement
pilot.
that was negotiated and ultimately finalized.
Yeah.
We always have that
Well,
option with any others.
So Newcastle started as a not-for-profit. They had a pilot in place. Then they got sold to a for-profit, and the pilot went away. Then they got sold from the for-profit entity to another nonprofit entity, and when they reapplied, we said, that's great, but you're gonna have to sign this new pilot just like the last one. So, yeah, we became whole for the most part on our portion of the tax roll where it hits people as the schools and MATC and whatever those other components of your tax bill are, they don't get any money. We preserved ours. Especially given we spend so much time with the fire department over at Newcastle.
Gonna say,
It's, yeah.
heavy fires, yeah.
Good question. Okay, moving right along, we're gonna go into capital and debt real quickly. There was some materials in the packet, and I won't spend too much time on this, but summarily, capital requests for 2024 are up about $800,000, almost to the tune of $6 million across the board. 2024, as I mentioned earlier, will be the last year of our 3-year road program borrowing, so we're gonna be looking to get back into the market and borrow for another 3 years worth of roads. On a combined basis, our capital, our pay-as-you-go capital, and our debt service are about $4 million, just north of $4 million within an $18 million general fund. So it's a significant share of our overall expense on a year-over-year basis. But that's debt service on the debt that we've taken out for roads, the Highland Road interchange, the DPW facility project a couple of years ago, and any future debt that we may incur for other facility upgrades or related land acquisition. The planned debt issue for 2025 is probably going to be in the neighborhood of about $10 million. The last one in '22 was $9.6 million. We kept it under $10 million, which gives us a small interest savings. Roads has typically been 5.1 million or thereabouts over the last couple of issues. DPW has requested 6.5 for the coming year. Lift Station E will be the other major component of this bond issue. Certainly that will be paid for with sewer utility revenues, but we're going to use our general obligation bonding capacity to lump that into the borrowing so as to take advantage of lower interest rates. The city has a broader tax base than the sewer utility, and we're able to borrow at better rates and probably do it more cheaply than if the sewer utility were to issue debt on its own. So we've done that in the past with the East Trunk Sewer Extension back in 2017, 2018, and we'll be looking to do that again as we've done historically. The brush site could be another project, depending on how bids come in, where we may need to add some money to the bond issue, or we may be able to pick that up through a larger increment for the roads than what we've typically done. And then we may have some other expenses that get discussed here tonight, or as we go through the budget process, that may become part of this issue for 2025. Question?
I may have missed it in the packet, but just could you talk about the, if I understand it right, there's something about a $10 million threshold on the bond. What's the difference in terms of financing costs between 9.9 and 10.1 million, if you will?
In my conversations with our financial advisor, Ellers, in the past, and I don't have any late-breaking or current information, it's much like the fund balance, Alderman Gebhardt. It's about 20 to 30 basis points that we're able to save on an interest basis. And if we keep the bond issue under $10 million, we qualify for the small issuer exemption, which makes the bonds bank qualified. And certainly our financial advisor, Ellers, could probably spin up a lot of information if you're interested in learning more about that exemption or that designation. It's not something I do day in and day out, but I do know that if we keep those issues under 10 million, there is a cost savings component. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to keep moving on here. Pay-as-you-go funding. This chart was in the packet, and as you can see, over the last number of years, we've been able to ramp up the amount of pay-as-you-go funding that we include in the general fund budget. So again, when we talk about pieces of the general fund budget, there are the departmental budgets or the divisional budgets. There's the debt service, which is principal and interest, and then there's pay-as-you-go capital. And then there are payments to the fire department and the library. That's really the general fund budget as a whole. And as you can see, we've taken that number up from the mid-800s all the way to the mid-1300s over the last number of years. We added $25,000 for parks funding, parks capital funding to the budget a year ago. And we had $20,000 drop off for the festival's electric, which was installed out on Cedarburg Road in 2023. Now we're going to shift gears because, as was explained in the packet, the amount, and was shown on the screen as well, the amount that's requested on an annual basis is north of $5 million. And we are only funding about 1.3. So we have a serious shortfall in terms of available revenues to address needed projects. And in May, the council reviewed a couple of alternative revenue sources with our friends from Ellers, two of which were vehicle registration fee that can be used for road improvements and impact fees for certain projects related to the expansion or growth that occurs within a community. Currently, we have one impact fee for parks, which is assessed on new dwelling units, and that goes into a segregated fund that we can use for new park projects or new park amenities to account for the growth that we're seeing in the community. The option exists to do that on the police and the fire side as well as for libraries, and some communities around Wisconsin utilize these impact fees. I think Grafton is a good local example where they have many impact fees on the books. So that may be something we want to look at going into next year as an organizational goal. Annually, our road spend, as was pointed out earlier, is about 1.7, and then we have about $350,000 that we include in the pay-as-you-go capital budget for road maintenance, like crack sealing and pavement patching. That amount was determined when we did a right-of-way asset study back in 2017. But inflation, as we've talked about, and other costs have eroded our buying power. And we have to keep in mind our current road network is over 200 miles. And right now, we're probably averaging in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 miles a year in roads. Our road ratings are probably in the mid to high sixes on a 10-point scale. And if we want to stay ahead and keep up with the progress that we've made over the last 15 years or so as an organization and a community, we're going to need to look at numbers or figures higher than 5 million, closer to that 6.5 million that Director Lundin is requesting for the next 3-year borrowing issue. And so I'm just throwing this out as food for thought. One potential option would be a vehicle registration fee, which is currently charged by more than 40 jurisdictions across the state. It's also known as a wheel tax. Some of the local communities that have such, they're a little larger than Mequon, include Appleton, Sheboygan, and Oshkosh. And the range that our management intern was able to ascertain as he was surveying all of these communities is between $10 and $40 per vehicle. It only applies to vehicles under 8,000 pounds, so think general automobiles, and no trucks or motorcycles or scooters would be subject to such a fee. It does require the governing board to adopt an ordinance, and there is a small 3-cent transaction fee that the DOT applies to each vehicle fee that is processed. If we were to assume, and this is just for illustration purposes, we were to take the median fee charged by municipalities here in Wisconsin and apply it to the 17,500 vehicles that we have registered here in Mequon that would be eligible or subject to this tax, we could generate $350,000 in additional revenues for our roads in a year. And if we multiply that over 3 years, like we do with our road borrowing, that's north of another $1 million that we would have available. Now, alternatively, and as I spoke to in the memo, we can issue additional debt, and we can take the $5 million up to $6 million or $6.5 million if we deem that to be the most prudent course. Obviously, that comes with additional interest expense, and that's something we're going to have to look at and weigh as we think about the future of our road program and how we want to fund those higher costs that we're seeing with asphalt, that we're seeing on the labor side. I mean, those get passed on to us, and if we don't change, we're gonna be in a position where we're gonna probably do less roads and less road miles in the future. So we want to be thinking about that in a variety of ways.
What's the definition of a truck? I'm just curious. Is that semi-trucks or pickup trucks or all trucks? I mean,
Oh, boy.
It seems like a pickup truck would be a car.
Just go as a weight.
Yeah, so there's got to be something.
The 8,000 pounds is the same definition, I think, as a work truck.
Like a,
Yeah, but so it's really light trucks.
okay.
If you have a pickup and you register it as just an auto, then it's covered, but if you register it as a truck, and if it's over the 8,000, then you would not be covered by that.
Interesting. Okay.
It's my truck's free.
So this would not be a huge cost or expense or a lift for the city if we were to enact such a fee. It's all administered through the State Department of Transportation, which collects the fee and then remits the proceeds back to the city, just like the state does for other shared revenues. But we just wanted to do some research as a follow-up to the strategic planning workshop and just illustrate what such a fee could look like for you all to, think about and consider as we roll forward both on this year's budget and into, a likely borrowing for capital improvements going into next year. Okay.
Hey, Will.
Yes.
I guess I just want to react and just provide some quick feedback. Are we going to discuss that again later, or this is our time to discuss that?
Any time is
Okay.
the appropriate time.
All right. I love the creative approach. I worry about too many of these fees. I like how you've kind of narrowed down on one that might be particularly interesting and it ties to road usage. So definitely I'll be thinking about that more. I'd be curious to learn more just as staff is looking into this topic. We've talked a lot about, particularly along the Port Washington Road corridor, we're kind of heading towards an era of more senior housing likely to be proposed and perhaps other denser commercial uses. You know, we have all of Uleo Creek. One of my questions is, impact fees apply to commercial developments as well, right? It's not just new residential units. The impact fees also are for commercial developments, correct? No? So it's only for new residential?
Dwelling units. So it could be multifamily, it
Okay.
could be single family.
But not, okay. Could it apply to senior as well?
It currently does. The only discount exists for memory care units.
Okay. So where I'm going with this, I'd be really curious about an exercise in possibly even decreasing the park impact fees slightly, and going down a path of looking at an emergency, essentially SOFD impact fee that's tied to really a higher recapture for these higher density projects is my concern. So, I mean, obviously these higher density projects are generating a significant amount. I think I heard 60% of all the trips. And other than the pilot fee, there's no other way other than potentially an impact fee to capture their usage of our emergency services. So when we talk about all the new facilities that we're gonna need coming up here, I guess that's more what's on my mind than bridging gaps in our operating budget. I'd be very curious about an impact fee for SOFD, emergency that's tied to density, not really targeting any sort of industry, but just more of a density that's being, you have a baseline for residential and then higher density purposes like multifamily and senior. So I'd really like to see that.
But then it's not an impact fee.
What would it be?
Impact fee is a statutorily set process that's based on a needs assessment that establishes what the rate would otherwise be that is then applied against dwellings. So you'd have to look at a different kind of fee, not an impact fee.
Okay. I think you get the concept. It's more new development, density, multifamily, senior. We're gonna see more of that, and kind of when it's being proposed and approved, that's the one time. So, I understand it's a complex subject and we're not gonna vet it out tonight, but I'd like more information on that. Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's an impact fee, it applies to all residential dwelling units equally. Not, we charge this type of resident one
Yeah.
more, a higher rate than the other. It's a rate across all residential units. Okay.
That's why I was hoping you could go off of density, so.
Well, they couldn't pay a higher rate, there'd just be more of them, so they would pay more because they'd have more per
Okay.
acre.
Fine,
Yeah.
that'd be good.
And impact fees, as I understand it, can only be used for new spending. Whether that's the expansion of a facility or the reconstruction or the growth of a facility, new park. Lemke Park is a good example. We're building a new restroom and concession facility in that park to serve the park users. And that is an appropriate use for those impact fees. We're not replacing Reuter Pavilion up at Rotary Park and using impact fees. That's not permitted.
So, I think we're gonna call you what do you want it standpoint, maybe don't use the word impact fee, just funding based on usage and density that would help offset some of these costs. So choose the term you want,
Sure.
and then, highlight which policies we can, really understand and focus on equitably, across the board to help offset these. I think the general concern that came up is, who are the users of SOFD? Those costs remain. We saw that we were very fortunate based on what some other communities are doing from asking for additional funds to cover operating costs where we're not dealing with that. But again, that is our highest cash outlay, within the city, that one, particular department. And as we're looking at development on Port Washington Road that could be multifamily, it could be multi-senior, it could be, some of those other things. We want to be in a equitable and non-discriminatory method of allocating to those costs to the types of development that are coming into the community that are using those resources most heavily, either on an initial basis or an annual basis, I think is what we're trying to accomplish here.
Like he said, 100%.
Got it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. We're going to move into the final stages of the slide deck here. Component units was another item on the agenda. Wyenberg Library. Over the last couple of years, the city has allocated just over $220,000 of funding to the library. This has included almost $71,000 in recurring revenue over the last 2 budgeting cycles, as well as making $150 in ARPA and COVID-related funds available for the library to utilize as it sees fit. Some of those funds have been used during the pandemic, I think for a book checkout window facing Cedarburg Road, and they've recently installed a new book bin, drop-off book bin in their parking lot, as well as radio frequency ID gates in order to prevent book theft and book loss. We completed a budget revenue last year and looked at all of their line items. Director Mushin Young and myself and the finance department and even Thiensville conducted that analysis. And there are some opportunities that were identified, including accounting, audit, payroll, insurance, etc. Right now, there's about $80,000 in ARPA funding that remains for the library. I think they're planning to use it to upgrade their boiler system. And staff is going to be looking to address the library funding agreement with Thiensville in early 2025. They have a new village president, and the village administrator has lost some staff in her office, and there is just not the capacity right now with our partners in Thiensville to take on this project. We've also had some things come up where we've had to pivot with hiring a new finance director and the FEMA modeling, amongst others, and we're going to be looking to address this project in 2025. So that's what I have for you. We understand the library has costs that are also increasing. We're taking that into account as we build the budget and prepare the draft for you all to review. We'll be meeting with the library next week as part of our departmental budget meetings to better understand where their cost pressures are and where they're seeing expenses go into next year. Yes?
When you talk about the library, when you're sort of planning out for 2025, I know not very many communities have an impact fee for library, but I think it just be good to have some preliminary numbers on what that would look like as you think about the next service agreement to accommodate future growth.
Okay. Happy to do it. Yes?
I thought about that too, but then again, Thiensville doesn't really have any development and won't. So kind of, it doesn't seem like we're going to be met there by our partner. My other question was, is it true, I can't remember, does SOFD, Mequon is the fiscal agent for SOFD, right? And we don't charge a fiscal.
That is correct.
And we don't charge a fiscal agent fee, do we? Because we wouldn't want to charge our partner for something we're trying to help with, right?
Since the department's inception at the beginning of 2023, we have not assessed a fiscal agent fee. This year, we have accounted for all of our fleet maintenance costs that we as the city incur SOFD is now paying us for those expenses.
Yeah, but those are actual, and then I'm just remembering, I think that Thiensville might be charging a fiscal agent fee to the library still.
They are, yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe you wrote an excellent letter that our partners didn't respond to during last year's budgeting process, where we asked Thiensville to waive their fiscal agent fee. Because we're not charging, we're trying to help our shared entity. So I guess I would just put it out there again. I know they have funding challenges, but when there's little ways to kind of help the partner agencies and show their support and kind of mimic the support that we're providing, I think they should consider doing that too. So I guess I would pose the same ask this year. I mean, they're charging, what, $8,000 to $10,000 to the library to handle their books, which I think they should waive it. I really do. It makes me frustrated every year. So, thank you.
Okay, that will be duly communicated.
Thank you.
Moving on to fire, we now have a couple of years of history with the new fledgling department and operating budgets, which have been in place now since the beginning of 2023. We ended 2023 with a $236,000 surplus. We're expecting another operating surplus this year, which is helping us to build a fund balance for a brand new department. And if you think of fund balance, not having any available cash on hand can create cash flow issues in terms of payroll. We've historically, in the last year to 2 years, had to advance money to the department when it first started because they didn't have available cash or revenues on hand. So now we've got a fund balance. The city is no longer having to front money to the department. And to the extent that we're able to build up an ample fund balance, we'll probably be engaging in discussions with the SOFD board about making a transfer to their capital fund in order to account for future equipment and future apparatus that is part of their long-range capital plan. So to the extent that the chief continues to manage his budget like he always has and come in under budget, we anticipate good things at the end of this year and going into 2025. The $300,000 in ARPA funding that we received from Ozaukee County in 2023 and 2024 is expiring. So that's not going to be a part of next year's budget. And we, again, will be looking at a levy adjustment within the allowance that the state grants, which, again, is CPI plus 2%. We don't anticipate any new full-time positions being added to the budget with that $300,000 going away. And we'll be meeting in Thiensville on Friday to hopefully finalize the draft budget, which will be before the SOFD board on 9/11, and then it'll be coming to the council and the village board in Thiensville as part of the overall municipal budgets later next month. And then lastly, we're into ARPA, and there were a couple of charts shared in the packet. This is just a snapshot as of late August here in 2024. As you can see, we've spent almost 1.6 million, or encumbered 1.6 million of the available 2.5 in funding. And there's a couple of big ticket projects that aren't part of that $1.6 million number. The land management system, which we currently have a balance of $490,000 on, as well as the brush site automation project at $1.65. We anticipate those contracts being awarded before the end of the year. And when you add those up, that's almost another $650,000, which will get us well on the way to allocating all 2.5 million of the money. I talked about the library. I think they have a boiler project that'll be awarded, and we'll have a request for that money. We talked this morning at the staff meeting about getting an RFP together for the Civic Campus Master Plan, so we can get that out on the street. At minimum, we will be putting that money in the community development budget for next year for that purpose, so that we can get a master planning process going and figure out the best way to arrange our public lands here in the center of the city. The other line items are relatively small, but we should have some savings, maybe on the land management system. That'll help us get to the $2.5 million number at the end of the year. Any questions on this? This will be before you probably on a monthly basis between now and the end of the year, so that we don't have that oh whoops moment at our council meeting in December. I don't want that on you. I don't want to be dealing with that. So we're going to be looking closely at this, probably at FNP and maybe even at a committee of the whole meeting come October, November. So we'll keep you apprised of efforts on that front. And then our next steps here, the meeting tonight. If you have any further questions or input, we're going to distribute the budget at the end of next month. We've got a meeting scheduled for appropriations on October 9th. That's also a Wednesday evening here in this room. If necessary, we'll reconvene for another meeting around mid-October. And then once we get that budget sent out on September 30th, Finance will pivot and work with Public Works and Engineering to get the sewer and water budgets together so we can get those recommended for adoption prior to November 12th, when we look to wrap everything up and be on our merry way for 2025. So that concludes my remarks and the information that I was hoping to share. Again, happy to take any questions or additional input from the group before we adjourn and head to our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Mayor, over to you.
Just shocked there's no more questions. Good dialogue, everyone. If there's any more questions, there's time before those next meeting dates to get them in. So
We've got 33 days, so if
Yep.
something, strikes your fancy or hits you on the ride home tonight, just shoot me an email and we'll be happy to consider or do the necessary research to bring that information forward. Thank you.
earlier is always better than later, but was
More
not saying.
ideas, thoughts.
Yeah.
That's always welcome too.
All right, there are no more questions. We can entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. To adjourn.
Second. Motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And we're adjourned. And we can immediately again. Roll call, please. Oops. Clerk's behind me.
Alderman Strelchek,
Here.
Alderman Tulaco.
Here.
Alderman Meyer,
Here.
Alderman Hancher,
Here.
Alderman Bach,
Here.
Alderman Parrish,
Here.
Alderman Bratt,
Present.
Alderman Gebhardt,
Here.
and Mayor Nurbin.
Here. Our only item this evening is a potential closed session items. It's an acquisition and/or use of property at 11015 North Market Street. Common Council may convene into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85 Prin 1 Prin E for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investment of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, and then may reconvene into open session to take such action as it may deem necessary. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
Move to go into closed session.
Second.
Motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Alderman Strelchek,
Aye.
Alderman Tulaco,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Hancher,
Aye.
Alderman Bach,
Aye.
Alderman Parrish,
Aye.
Alderman Bratt,
Aye.
Alderman Gebhardt,
Aye.
and Mayor Nurbin.
Aye. I don't anticipate we're going to return to open session, so let the AV guy go and say goodnight to everyone.